Hello, everyone. I'm Yerin Choi, and I want to thank you for coming to my lecture recital. I will be presenting my dissertation research, a study on the solo piano pieces of Jiesun Lim. I grew up in Seoul, Korea, and moved to United States to study for my master's degree at University of Southern California. And then I am very privileged to pursue the Doctoral of Musical Arts in Piano Performance here at George Mason University under the guidance of Dr. Linda Munson. I have a huge interest in studying contemporary Korean composers who merge the Korean traditional music and the Western classical music. And I found Jiesun Lim, a Korean composer, affectionately called a little giant. My professor, Dr. Munson, helped me with my decision a lot, and I'm very pleased. As I listened to and studied Jiesun Lim's music more and more, I was fascinated with her music. She incorporates the motifs of Korean traditional music into the Western compositional styles and the aesthetics of classical music, sometimes imitating Korean instruments. Today, I'm going to explain, focusing on the stylistic characteristics found in Lim's 4 solo piano pieces. And because of my limited time in this 1-hour lecture recital, I will perform 2 specific pieces, which are Spiritual Dance and a poem about spring. This dissertation investigates the stylistic features of Lim's 4 solo piano works: Spiritual Dance, Ice Flower, a poem about spring, and Fantasia on the theme of Chopin. In order to help understand the characteristics of Jiesun Lim, my dissertation explores Korean musical backgrounds in general, followed by specific characteristics of her major works, and presents a detailed analysis on the 4 solo piano works. The analysis concentrates on the examination of forms, harmonies, melodies, rhythms, and performance suggestions in each of Jiesun Lim's solo piano works. I thought it was important to study and perform on Jiesun Lim's solo piano pieces because, 1, she is greatly respected Korean contemporary composer who has written a great keyboard literature. As a Korean pianist, I have sometimes felt that there is a hesitancy on the part of performers to program contemporary Korean composers because their music is not necessarily as well known and respected as Western leading contemporary composers. So I thought it is meaningful to provide new but qualified repertories of a fine Korean composer. Then why Jiesun Lim? Her piano works incorporates all of the Western aesthetics and compositional styles, and yet hold onto Korean traditional motifs and imitation of Korean traditional instruments. This creates unique and creative sounds that we could not hear in Western music. And I think it will give more variety for performers in choosing their repertories. The composer Jiesun Lim, born in Seoul, South Korea in 1960. She is serving as a director at Yonsei University. Lim studied in both Seoul, Korea and Indiana University in the United States. Lim has been chosen as one of the 60 leaders of Korea by Gyeongyang newspaper and received many awards in Korea, Japan, and United States. Her compositions were premiered and performed worldwide in events and festivals. Composed over 60 works, including orchestra, chamber, vocal, and solo instrument music. Her music released in the early 1990s had atonal sound and system, which might have been less accessible and a little off-putting to the most audiences at that time in Korea. However, in 2000s, Lim started to compose memorable melodies with Korean traditional elements. This is the period that all solo piano works were written. Most recently, in the last decade, she wanted to break boundaries and merge different fields of arts, such as Korean traditional music, contemporary Western music, popular music, and even visual arts. As I mentioned before, most of Lim's solo piano pieces were written in 2000s, where she employs memorable melodies and familiar elements to her works. It is not clear whether it is for the reason of pursuing the familiar, but all of Jiesun Lim's works are given titles that seem to describe them. Spiritual Dance, Ice Flower, a poem about spring, and Fantasia on a theme of Chopin. The first solo piano work is Spiritual Dance. Written in 2004, Spiritual Dance was commissioned by Cho Hee-yoon, who is a pianist, premiered this piece in his recital in 2004. This work is comprised of 4 movements, which represents each stage of finding I. The composer describes that 4 different movements show different stage of her spiritual journey. Ice Flower is a piece written by the composer inspired by natural phenomena experienced directly during her research years in Michigan, and it was the winter time of 2003. Lim transferred the trembling and impressive moments from the beautiful scene into a piano piece in a single movement. The piece was commissioned by Yonsei University professor Bong S-shin in 2006 and premiered as the first song in the second part of her recital. A Poem About Spring is a semi-final destination for the 2008 Seoul International Competition in Piano Section, and is a work commissioned by the composer Jiesun Lim. At that time, the composer came up with the theme of A Poem About Spring, with the idea that competition's semi-final would be held in April 2008. Therefore, in this piece, various images from the theme of spring are emerging as vectors that develop music. As a large number of promising pianists from all over the world participated to this competition, this piece requires high-level techniques and the ability to communicate with the audience. Commissioned by pianist Miran Song, Fantasia on a theme of Chopin was premiered in October 2009. Lim borrowed the theme from one of Chopin's more dissonant pieces, Prelude Opus 28, number 2. Lim was attracted by this particular prelude because of the unique sonority comes from non-harmonic tones under an incompatible slow melody, and wants to communicate in musical language with Chopin beyond time and space through this fantasia. I'm going to talk about the distinct styles found in her solo piano works. The tonal stroke construction of Lim's solo piano works is based on the combination of whole tone and chromatic scales in melodical lines, emphasizing a tonal center. On top of that, a variety of tone colors are generated from the synthesis of those tritone, modal, octatonic, pentatonic, chromatic, whole tone scales, and made the boundary of harmony and melody ambiguous. Sound itself became perhaps the primary element in Lim's composition. The piano pieces have emphasized the importance of tone color or timbre and texture as materials as basic and as structurally important as motive and rhythm. This is an excerpt from Ice Flower showing wide range of contrary motions. Melodically, as you can see in this example, it is very obvious to catch the contrary motions in both visually and audibly. The composer's favor of symmetry, what will be discussed later in a part of the reasons to have many contrary motions in her works. It also shows the contrast of the textures, which alternate between actively fast passages and the static passages with longer valued notes. And the elongated phrases of parallel fourth, fifth, and sixth are probably one of the stylistic features of Lim's composition tendency, which seeks specific tone colors, escaping from the traditional tonal system. This is an excerpt from a poem about spring displaying parallel fifth. Another interesting point in her musical language is the balanced tone of consonance and dissonance. For example, in the middle section of a poem about spring, the melody is in the G Lydian. It is accompanied by G flat major chord. by two dissonance two-note clusters. This polytonal texture suddenly releases in the next measure, having a consonant sound in E flat and G flat majors. Lim does not use strict dissonances constantly. The concept of tonality always disguises somewhere to be tangled with more innovative and progressive sounds throughout. In the first movement of spiritual dance, the tonal structure of the theme is based on the sonority of tritone, whole tone, and chromatic scales. The resonance created by the mixture of these tones is a typical Lim's musical language in her piano works. The theme of the first movement is presented by left hand accented notes, here marked as all blue circled notes. Lim creates some special sonority having a tritone in the first two notes, D and A flat. As a representative tritone in the beginning of the theme, as the theme is repeated for more than 5 times throughout the movement, this tritone sonority pervades amongst other resonances. And the importance of the tritone maintains and expands to the other movements, which will be discussed in later sections. A sound color of the first half of the theme is created by a whole tone scale, A flat, B flat, C, and D. But later part of the theme appears to be G harmonic scale, minor scale with 4 added tones, E flat, F sharp, G, and A. Therefore, the full thematic phrase is in the combination of a tonal harmony of G harmonic minor, having non-harmonic sonority A flat, which is also a tritone from the first note D. As alternating A flat and A natural, it blurs the boundary of tonal and atonal quality. In addition, a G major sound is built in the first variation, adding B natural, and even all 12 tones are presented in the second variation, displaying a whole tone quality. The first movement of spiritual dance. even if she does not use Korean traditional pentatonic scales and traditional musical instruments too explicitly. Her music already has a Korean gene. Her compositions contain Korean sentiments, which naturally come from her inside of spirit, even when she does not utilize Korean traditional elements by intention. Especially in her second movement of spiritual dance, I was able to discover several features influenced from Korean traditional music. Firstly, a similar instrumental technique of 가야금 is heard in the second movement. 가야금 is the best-known Korean traditional musical instrument. It is a string instrument with 12 silk strings played with two hands. The right hand plucking and flicking the strings, while the left hand manipulates the strings to add vibrato and other effects. As a string instrument, 가야금 plays lots of embellishments before the note heads, which do not take up space rhythmically. In 신별곡 for 가야금, composed by Byung-dong Baek, we could observe similar usage of grace notes as Jiesun Lim's second movement. When we look at the grace notes in the second movement, the similar quality of 가야금 sound is heard. Especially the left hand plays more of these ornaments. Featuring a rhythmic texture that is similar to the improvisation of Korean drum, 장구, Lim embodies the drum sound through the exhalation of the rhythmic value. The examples are 장구, Korean drum playing the da-da-da-da technique. It is an impromptu rhythm reminiscent of Korean drum's Chopin sound, which is very frequently used in 장구 playing. We could hear this rhythm played in the performance of 설장구 dance. Here, in both second movement of spiritual dance and ice flower, show the percussion characteristics of the 장구 emphasizing through the repetition of the homophone. The last feature is the similar texture of shinawi. A shinawi is an instrumental ensemble rooted in shaman music from rural area of Korea. As shinawi was originated from the music for the dance or song of shaman rites, the ensemble requires the most extensive improvisation among Korean musical genres. With the combination of woodwind, string, percussion instruments, performers play without any preset music scores. Instead, they play with their musicality and techniques within the predetermined rhythm and tonality, while improvising and weaving their ways into different melodies. This is how shinawi sounds like. For example, the long valued notes on the top layer sounds like woodwind playing, such as Korean bamboo flute or piri. The middle layer takes rhythmic instruments like Korean drum, jangu, or buk. The string instruments like kayagum or kamungo at the bottom with many grace notes, what we've talked about. Each layer unfolds improvisatory figures in different ways, using repeated notes, trills, long sustained notes, and irregular rhythmic pattern. Now, I will play the second movement of spiritual dance, and I hope you could find some of traditional Korean music spirit through this performance. Numerical ideas. It is one of Lim's compositional technique to use planned numbering system in her music. In the fourth movement of spiritual dance, the tempo on the right hand accelerates gradually through the decrease of note values. As the pitches are transposed across down a major third for 3 octaves until the arrival to D. The 12-note theme is presented firstly with 4 16th note groups, twice in different pitch levels. The red color boxes indicate the number 4. And then the rhythm changes to quintuplet, presenting the same theme for 3 times. Here marked as blue color for number 5. Changing into sextuplet in the middle of the 3rd statement of the quintuplet group, the theme lastly shown with 6 beam notes for 4 times. Another example of numerical composition is found in the 3rd movement of spiritual dance. The original motivic phrase is presented in the first 3 measures. The first measure has 2 5-note 16th note groups, which are motive A in zigzag motion and motive B chromatic going down. And the second measure is the inversion of the first measure. Reaching to the note A flat in the 3rd measure. Here, from measure 1 to 15, show the motivic idea developing with 1 additional note each time it is presented, marked as blue boxes. Motive A does not change its figuration, while the next chromatic 16th note group, motive B, keeps extending its gradually adding 1 note until the development finishes. So, to the last statement of the phrase, the number of notes of the motive B is elongated from 5 to 8. This is the 3rd movement of spiritual dance. Lim used a cyclic system as a unifying device through thematic transformation and restatement of the thematic materials at the last. The first example is a thematic transformation shown in Fantasia on the theme of Chopin. Lim picked the first three-note motif of Chopin's Prelude Opus 28, number 2, to be transformed and developed in her Fantasia. And this is the first three-note motif of Chopin's Prelude, having intervals of down a perfect fourth and up a minor third. The notes marked with blue circles indicate the three-note motif shown in all over the place of Jiesun Lim's Fantasia. The motif is changed in pitch and rhythm, sometimes combined with other textures of layers, maintaining an intervallic factor. In measure 1, measure 29, from measure 61 to 63. And from measure 101 to 102. In the result, a variety of sonority is created by these transformations and combinations, yet keeping the original motivic idea, unifying the entire work. In spiritual dance, the last movement presents explicit reminiscences of the three preceding movements, extracting very fragmented thematic units. This is from measure 59 to 74 of the last movement, and all thematic materials from previous movements are marked as different colors. Marked as red color, the fragment from the first movement has interval of major 7th and 9th in a very fast sextuplet. The yellow color from the second movement show the accelerated rhythmic gesture followed by grace note figure. The blue boxes display chordal phrases and the motif A and B from the third movement. And the bell-like gesture is combined with third movement motif A and B in from measure 71. From fourth movement. Those fragments are so organically connected and combined together that creating a perfect piece of memory right before the piece ends. Here is the fourth movement of spiritual dance. Lim arranges all solo piano pieces in either a ternary form, A-B-A, or an arch form, A-B-C-B-A, which makes symmetrical shapes. This principle of symmetry is used not only in the terms of structure, but also as a tool to create new tones in her music. Lim uses many symmetrical features as a device of an evolution towards breaking down of the traditional tonal system. 12 notes are used equally by using the chromatic technique more intensively, away from the traditional compositional system. Employing tritone and symmetrical scales like octatonic, whole tone, and chromatic scales enable her to manipulate scales to be transposed to other notes, yet retain exactly the same notes as the original scale. In addition, there are lots of linearly symmetrical spots found in her works. When we look at from measure 26 to 27 of a poem about spring, there are 3 tone qualities, tritone, whole tone, and chromatic tone, presented within 2 measures. The individualized tones are organically joined together to different shapes quite freely under the composer's preparation. As a result, we could hear a new and special tone quality of Lim's own. In Ice Flower, Lim employs all 7 semitones between A and D sharp, a tritone, to a main motive. And develop it to the symmetrical frame with both hands moving in other directions with the expansion of the interval range to octave, having all 12 tones. Furthermore, the motivic idea develops again as mirroring the motif with an axis of symmetry. Here the axis is C, as both hands play the same pitch intervals in opposite direction. The beginning and the ending of the Ice Flower even display an explicit symmetrical arch shape with the dynamic coincidence. Lastly, I will play a poem about spring, which is elaborately crafted with unique tone colors and textures in Lim's musical language, picturing this image of spring. I would encourage you to listen carefully to distinguish Jiesun Lim's distinct compositional features that we discussed today. I'm very pleased to work on Korean composer Jiesun Lim's music and be able to present it to wider audiences. There were initial challenges presented due to a lack of available research articles and books devoted to her music. I hoped that my study on Jiesun Lim's music inspire more pianists to program this music. Her music will be more widely played and heard, just as her chamber music is already lauded and celebrated by so many performers. Lastly, I want to give my special thanks to my dissertation committee, Dr. Munson and Dr. Smith, and particular thanks to my dissertation chair, Dr. Owens, for his excellent guidance and his encouragement. Also, 1,000 thanks for your attention today. Is it finished?